Okay, so thank you very much for having me here and talking about city laments in Mesopotamia. Okay. So how is the topic of the fallen city treated in Mesopotamian literature in general? So we have royal inscriptions. So this means that are inscriptions of rulers, and they obviously speak about city destruction in the course of war, but they usually don't lament these cities. So the point is, if a city is destroyed then or conquered, it's a great deed of the ruler. I conquered this city, I took its treasures and brought them to the temple of Enlil or something. The earliest phase of royal inscriptions, these are the early dynastic royal inscriptions, they don't give much details about city destruction. So they are very short and concise. I destroyed that city, I conquered that city. The inscriptions from the Empire of Agade, so the first Semitic kingdom that is nicely documented in Mesopotamia, they have more details about deportations and mass killings. So what happened when a city was taken and destroyed, and the inscriptions of the Neo-Assyrian period from the first millennium, they report about terror operations during sieges, like flaying of captives and impaling prisoners, just to terrorize the city and to convince them to give up. After a successful siege, cities were plundered and many inhabitants were killed or sold into slavery. So this is what we have in the royal inscription. But what does it mean when a city is destroyed? And if a city is fallen, so it's obviously a traumatic event for the city inhabitants. So in contrast to modern cities, all ancient cities in Mesopotamia had a city wall, so they were well fortified, there were fortifications, and people usually felt secure within these city walls. But when it's taken, it's a collapse of a social organization, and this is described in detail in the Lamentations. It's they have to realize that the city walls cannot protect the inhabitants from the dangerous outside, and remembering the falling city is connected to politics of remembrance. But why should such an event be remembered and become part of the cultural memory? Therefore, let's look at the history of Sumerian lamentations. So, the first text that is usually described as a lament, as a lamentation, is the so-called Urukagina lament by the king Urukagina, so the last king of Lagash before it was conquered by Lugal-Zagesi. The next text we have is approximately 200 to 250 years later. It's the so-called Curse of Agade, a text that to some part laments and to some part celebrates the downfall of Agade, so this first empire in Mesopotamia. And then we have the city laments. They lament, so the Urukagina laments that Lagash was conquered. The curse of Agade laments the destruction of Agade, and the city laments, they focus on different cities because there was another larger kingdom in Mesopotamia, the Ur-3 state, and this collapsed around the year 2000, and then these city laments were prepared. And at approximately the same time, we have canonical lamentations. So these are kind of ahistorical lamentations because they don't focus on a concrete event. They just discuss the power of the gods and the potential destruction of cities. But now let's shortly look at the Urukagina lamentation. What does the text mention? It discusses the destruction of temples, the plundering of precious items. It mentions that statues, so statues that represented the gods or the rulers, that they were thrown into wells, and no human victims are mentioned. So it's really destruction of temples. And the real victim is the city god Ningirsu, because his house was destroyed. So temples were conceptualized as the home of the gods. So the gods lived there, they had their sleeping room there, they had their kitchen there, they had their bathroom there, and all kinds of stuff. And people could visit the gods. So this is kind of Mesopotamian concept of a temple. And if you plunder the temple in ideology, then you plundered the house of a god. And at the end of the text, it is stated, the leader of Umma, so this is the enemy city, having sacked Lagash, has committed a sin against the god Ningirsu. So Mesopotamian rulers usually never mention that they lost any battle or any war. So in this, the text is really exceptional, but here we see why it was done, because the king, Urukagina, wanted to state that he himself has committed no sin, that he has respected Ningirsu, the city god and his property, but that the evil neighbor has done that. So Yugal Sagisi from Umma. So obviously the ideology behind this text is that there is a sin and this sin should be punished. The question that remains somewhat open is that why this has happened to Urukagina, a good ruler, and to his city. The next text, the curse of Agade, tells us the story of the rise and downfall of the First World Empire. So this empire of Agade is often described as an empire, although there is no agreed upon definition of empire, especially in ancient studies. So some people say it's an empire and others say it's not an empire. But the size of the state that or the area that was governed by this state or kingdom or empire or whatever was exceptional. So while the earlier states before that governed quite a small area, so like 50 kilometers or 30 kilometers around the city, the kings of Agade, they ruled from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. So it was really a big jump in size. The text then mentions that the divine favor is withdrawn from the city of Agade and its king Naram-Sin. And the text also has a tragic aspect, like in a Greek tragedy, because all this is revealed to King Naram-Sin in a dream, and this starts a chain of events that finally leads to the downfall of that city. So Naram-Sin is in despair, and he first does the right thing. He laments for 7 years, and he sits in the temple and he weeps, and he does not take his royal crown and stuff, just to calm down the gods. But this does not work. And after 7 years, he's in a rage, and he goes to Nippur and he destroys the temple of Enlil, the main god of the Mesopotamian pantheon. So obviously this has to be punished, and Enlil looks towards the mountains and sends down the wild mountain people to take revenge and to destroy Agade. And here we have the text. So Enlil, the roaring storm that subjugates the entire land, the rising deluge that cannot be confronted. So here you have two like very typical metaphors of destruction, namely the storm and the deluge. Was considered what should be destroyed in return for the wrecking of his beloved Ekur. So that's the temple of Enlil. He lifted his gaze towards the Gubin mountains and made all the inhabitants of the broad mountain range descend. Enlil brought out of the mountains those who do not resemble other people, who are not reckoned as part of the land, the Gutians, an unbridled people with human intelligence but canine instincts and monkeys' features. So this is the savage barbarians from the mountains. They come down and destroy Agade. So, and how is this conceptualized? So the text in its first 56 lines describe how happiness is in Agade, how everything is prosperous and working well, and a lot of foreigners are visiting the city of Agade. They have exotic stuff from all over the world, but then there is the turning point in line 57, the word of Ekur, so the word from Enlil, from his temple, it changes everything. So in line 86, Naram-Sin sees the sad future of Agade in a dream and falls into despair. He laments and performs ecstaspy. So if you wanted to do something important in Mesopotamia, then you had to get confirmation from the gods, and that's through ecstaspy. So there are different forms.
Liver of a lamb.
Yes, so this was the most important way, that there was a ritual where you slaughtered a lamb, and then an expert was examining the liver, because the liver was considered to be the writing tablets of the gods. So the idea was to ask a question, and the god sends the answer in the liver of this lamb. And here Naram-Sin asks to build a temple just to avoid the bad situation, but Enlil says no. So, and then as he sees no solution to this, the text says to change what had been inflicted upon him, so Naram-Sin, what Enlil had said for him, he tried to alter. So here we see the main mistake of Naram-Sin, because many texts stress that the word of Enlil cannot be changed. So he's the foremost of the gods. If he says anything, it is stable and true and cannot be changed. So obviously from the beginning, it is clear that the idea of Naram-Sin to alter the judgment of Enlil has to be futile. Then we see the climax of the crisis. So again, these metaphors of destruction. Enlil, the roaring storm that subjugates the entire land, the rising flood that has no opponent. Yes, so the metaphors of the storm and the flood. And yeah, so if you're interested in that kind of language, I wrote an article about this together with a theologian, so expert for the Hebrew Bible, Mark Smith, on the day storm in Mesopotamian literature, a background to the biblical day of Yahweh. So it's on the conceptualization of this destruction day in the Bible and in Mesopotamia. And in the Curse of Agade, we find for the first time a rather detailed description of the disaster. And it's quite interesting that many of those descriptions of disaster and hunger, that they start with high prices. So very actual topic, inflation. In those days, oil for 1 shekel, so 1 shekel is a standard unit of silver, was only half a liter. Grain for 1 shekel was only half a liter. Wool for 1 shekel was only 1 mina. Fish for 1 shekel only 1 ban measure. These sold at such prices in the markets of the cities. So this is like from contemporary or somewhat earlier documents, we know that this was 300 times higher than the usual prices. So this means there was no food. Those who lay down on the roof died on the roof. Those who lay down in the house were not buried. People were flailing at themselves from hunger. By the Kiur, Enlil's great place, dogs were packed together in the silent streets. If 2 men walked there, they would be devoured by them, and if 3 men walked there, they would be devoured by them. So we know they had street dogs in Sumerian cities. Noses were punched, heads were smashed, noses were piled up, heads were sown like seeds. Honest people were confounded with traitors. Heroes lay dead on top of heroes. The blood of traitors ran upon the blood of honest men. So this idea that there is no justice anymore is quite interesting, because it's a very general and very old human idea that the world is a solid and just place, nicely governed by the gods, and that bad people will get punishment, and that good people will be rewarded for their good behavior. But in this situation, there is no more judgment, no more justice. So evil people die and good people die as well. So what basically happened that we can grasp historically is that Mesopotamia was overrun by the Guti. So this coalition of mountain people, or one mountain people, whatever. So we don't really know them very well, because we don't have any texts. So the texts come from Mesopotamia, and these people had no script, and they came and invaded Mesopotamia and destroyed Akkad. So the Sumerians might have been happy that the city of Akkad was destroyed, because Sumerian cities were earlier destroyed by Akkad. They had several uprisings, and the empire fought back and killed many of them. But Sumerian cities were destroyed as well. So Mesopotamia basically fell victim to savage people from the mountains, and a possible conclusion or possible message could be, we are not able to defend ourselves, and the Mesopotamians considered themselves the center of the civilized world, because it was very obvious and natural for them, because all the important gods lived in Mesopotamia. So it had to be like the selected land of the world. But obviously this is an unwanted message for the restoration of a Mesopotamian hegemony. So things were changed a little bit, and the agency was not with the Guti, who invaded Mesopotamia, but the agency was with Enlil, the foremost god of Mesopotamia. So the Guti have no real agency. They're simply a tool of divine anger, and they fulfill the will of Enlil. The city lemons, so they're historically, so now we're changing texts. This is the set of 5 known lemons about Mesopotamian cities, and they're written shortly after, or somewhat later, after the end of the Ur-3 period. So this is roughly the last century of the 3rd millennium. 5 texts are known today, and the destruction is caused by the gods. And this time, it's not the Gutium anymore, but it's the Elamites. So Mesopotamia is roughly today's Iraq, and the Elamites, they live in southern Iran, so on the eastern shore of the Persian Gulf. The city laments take over many motifs and metaphors from the curse of Agade. They speak about some divine decree being altered or overturned. The divine word, the storm, and the flood bring the destruction to Mesopotamia. Interestingly, sin, so what we had in the Urukagina lament and also in the Curse of Agade, is not in the focus. These texts develop an ideology of a kind of natural law of changing rules. So kingdom never rests in one place, it exhausts itself, and it has to move on. So it's like in the famous Sumerian king list, where we have the ideology of one kingship. So there is always one king, but kingship moves from person to person and from place to place. And in this setting, so what do people actually want from a rule or a certain situation? They want the situation to be stable, not to change all the time, because they understand if something changes, if kingship goes to another place, this will go hand in hand with destruction, and many people will lose their lives and there will be a disaster. So they ask the gods, so this is a kind of prayer and the expression of a wish that there will be stability. And they ask the highest god, so An is the sky god, may An not change the decrees of heaven, the plans to treat the people with justice. So again, we're back to this justice topic, and we have seen in the Curse of Agade that if we are in such a war situation, there is no justice anymore. May An not change the decisions and judgments to lead the people properly. May An and Enlil not change it. May Enki and Ninmach not change it. So while these city laments describe all this destruction, they express the wish that this destruction will not take place. The canonical lamentations take this one step further, because they don't describe any concrete historical destruction. They usually give just long lists of destroyed cities and destroyed temples in the hope to avoid all this kind of destruction. So they were first written down in the beginning of the second millennium. So it seems that they were contemporary with the city laments, and we have different genres. So the balangs, the ershemmas, so these two are categories named after musical instruments. So the balang is the harp, and the next one is the tear of the shem drum, and the tear of soothing the heart, and the shuilas are the latest genre. It's the song of raising the hand, so it's a praying gesture. The balangs are the longest lamentations, so they are up to several thousand lines, and we have really many of them. So a Neo-Syrian catalog, so a catalog from the first millennium from Assurbanipal's famous library, it lists more than 50 balangs. So it was a really huge corpus of literature, but not all of these balangs are reconstructed today because we don't have all the manuscripts, but we see from this catalog that it was really a huge corpus of Sumerian text that existed well up into the Hellenistic period in Mesopotamia. So the latest datable Balang text comes from 81 BC. So they have a really 2,000-year-old tradition of writing these canonical lamentations. So these texts usually contain a hymnic part, so this means a praise of the power of a certain god or a goddess. and then the Lamentations over the destruction with these long lists of destroyed places, destroyed temples. And at the end, there is usually a hard pacification unit. So the hope is expressed that the god will calm down and that he will not put the destruction into place. And it's also really interesting that these texts, they have the first critical editions that we know so far. So if you study classical philology, you often hear that the first critical editions were done in Alexandria. But actually, we have something like this in the library of Assurbanipal, because people examined different manuscripts, compared them, and annotated the variants in their manuscripts. And in addition to this critical editions, they also did Akkadian translations of the Sumerian texts. So they had the Sumerian text line, sometimes with variants, and then they gave sometimes up to 5 different Akkadian translations. So one of them was a straightforward translation, and the others were somehow Kabbalistic. So they had an old sacred text, and they tried to find hidden meanings in the text. So what is the content of these Balangs? We have no specific historical events. The destructive power of the god or the goddess is praised. The destruction of cities and temples is described, and this is very important for the psychology of these texts, the interruption of the cult is described. This means, so the idea of the Mesopotamian temple is that, or even if you go a step back, the idea of Mesopotamian anthropology is that the humans were created in order to serve the gods. Because in the beginning of the creation, there were the high gods, they did not work, and there were the lower gods, and they had to do all the work. They had to build the temples, they had to dig the canals, they had to irrigate and plow the fields, and had to produce food. And then these younger gods went on strike. They were very angry, and they said, this work is killing us. And then, depending on the story, but usually Enki, so here you have the foremost specialist on this god, came up with the great idea to create humanity in order to relieve the gods of this work. And since then, humanity is taking care of the work, and they are basically servants of the gods. But if the temple god is interrupted, then the gods have no food, no one takes care of them. And so the god is reminded why humanity was created, and that they have a clear function in this world, namely to serve the gods. And if there is no cult, there is no food, no entertainment, and no nice thing for the gods. So if the gods decide to destroy the cities, then they're harming themselves. So that's all the psychology or like motivation of these texts. And in the end, they say again, oh, you are so powerful, we know it, and you can destroy everything, but please don't do it. Calm down. So, and now let's quickly go to this injustice of war. So we've already seen this motive in the curse of Agade. So honest people were confounded with traitors, heroes lay dead on top of heroes. The blood of traitors ran upon the blood of honest men. So this is a reoccurring motive. For example, in the lament of Suma and Ur, we have so that liars lay upon honest men. The blood of liars ran upon the blood of honest men, or in the Balangs, heroes lay dead on top of heroes. In the high step, blood ran upon blood. Blood of traitors ran upon the blood of honest men. So this was obviously something that was troubling people, because since earliest time, people had the idea that there was justice in this world. So this is the Austrian philosopher Ernst Toppitsch called this the sociomorphic idea of the world. So you have a village, a city, and there is some ruler who claims to establish justice, and you imagine the universe along the same lines. So there is a high god. So in the village, there is some leader. In the city, there is a king. And in heaven, there is a God who takes care of everything and organizes everything in a just way. And here you can clearly see the feeling that something is wrong with this world. Something is going on that breaks this just system. So was there a kind of disruptive crisis in the worldview of old Babylonian times? After a certain point, so in the middle of the second millennium, the city lemons were not copied anymore. So no one seemed to have been interested in those texts. Their ideas were present in the canonical lamentations, which were still copied and performed in the temple until the 1st century BC. And in old Babylonian times, a new idea of universal punishment arose and was formulated in Atrahasis. So this is possibly the first text where we have an elaborate story of a great flood, killing everyone, so very similar to that of the biblical story of the flood. So this idea of a universal deluge, which in Atrahasis finally turned out to be a very stupid idea of the gods because they got rid of their servants. Okay, but that's not the topic for now, but the divine wisdom was heavenly questioned in Atrahasis. So Enlil was not presented as a powerful universal god, but as a somewhat idiotic ruler who makes bad decisions, who is afraid of the other gods when they make their revolution. And it seems that the answer of the city lemons, it's Enlil's will, and the will of the god is questionable, was not regarded satisfactory anymore, at least not by all people. And Atrahasis was quite a popular text. So this problem of justice and evil, so it's usually called the problem of theodicy, so the question if the world is just, can be adapted. So if you have a certain worldview and there is a crisis that produces doubts, disbelief, and discontent, you are sometimes able to adapt this worldview. So you make some minor changes, you give some explanations. So if the Gutians come and destroy Mesopotamia, you could say, oh, our gods are really powerless. We should adopt the gods of the Gutians. They are much stronger. But then you have the idea to explain, no, it was not the Gutians. It was the idea of Enlil. Because Naram-Sin did something bad. He sent the Gutian. Now we have to keep on honoring Enlil and everything will work out well. So this is one model, the adaptation. And the other model is disruption. So there is an old worldview and there is a crisis and the old model cannot be used anymore. And then we have like new ideas, new worldview, like for example, Atrahasis. So like every war has his problems, and the injustice of war seemingly was a big problem for the Mesopotamians. So the sin sanction scheme is a very, very old one. It most probably existed long before the script. This is this sociomorphic idea of the universe. People should be punished when they do something wrong. And war, obviously, is an exception to this rule. But after the war, justice and order should be re-established. So, for example, we have this lamentation over the death of the first ruler of the Ur-3 dynasty. Here, the gods are accused of changing their word and change the precious pronouncements which he had fixed. It is an empty midst of the evening, whatever this means. The decreed fate that Enlil has fixed was altered deceitfully. So here it is said that the gods gave a promise and they did not keep it. And this is a speech of a goddess, the goddess Inanna. The king is often conceptualized as her husband, and she seemingly is angry that Wanama had to die. And she says, I want to hurl the following as an insult at An, the lord of the gods, that Enlil has raised the head with me, who has changed that word, the sublime word that King An has uttered, who has changed this word. Rules in the land may have been established for us, but they have not been observed. For the place of the gods where daylight breaks, its abundance does not exist anymore. And also in this text, the king Melammu finally says, what have I obtained by being so zealous serving the gods by day? I have even spent the time sleeplessly serving the gods by night. I think this nicely formulates how bad events could question the beliefs of people. So if they have some bad event in their life, even if it's a literary text, they could question what they had done so far and if this was nonsense. Enlil has changed his word too often. The text discussed above demonstrates a real crisis in a worldview. The old solutions do not work anymore. The exception to the reliability, inalterability of Enlil's word has become the rule. A highly static worldview with no good explanation for crisis is not suitable in an unstable time as the Old Babylonian period. Atrahasis provides an alternative explanation for crises, which are no crises anymore. So all the smaller crises are integrated into the worldview because Atrahasis explains that these wars and illnesses and the child death demon and all bad things that exist in this world are necessary to keep the number of humanity so small that the gods will send no huge deluge again. So Atrahasis basically says there are two possibilities. Either there is no war and mankind explodes and creates so much noise that the gods are disturbed and they will kill all of them, or there are these minor evils that we have to accept as they are a part of the world. But besides this, the Lamentations still exist and provide us with another story, namely angry gods that sometimes destroy parts of the world. So if we look at the history of Lamentations in Mesopotamia, we see that the two oldest texts, namely the Urukagina lament and the Curse of Agade, they argue that the city was destroyed because of a sin. The city laments, they said that it's somehow a natural development, that kingship moves from place to place, kingship exhausts itself, and in the canonical Lamentations, divine anger is in the center of the argumentation, and they often claim so gods got angry and humans don't have the capacity to understand the way of the gods. So that's their main argument. So, but how were these texts performed? Did they have people who listened to them? So for the Urukagina lament, we have no idea. Also for the Curse of Agade, we have no idea, but it was a popular text in the old Babylonian schools. So students had to read it and copy this text. So therefore we have a lot of copies and could reconstruct the whole text more or less. The city laments, now we have information. They also were popular texts in the schools, but they were performed on special occasions. So with the Nippur lament, there is even the name of a king mentioned, and the text was performed when the reconstruction of the city took place. So then it was read out the awful story of the city, how it was destroyed in war and how people had to die. And in the end, the king said, now I'm here, everything is fine, and hopefully the gods will never do that again. So this was the...
Also, everything is fine. This the test of this signal. So Tartu will not be destroyed. Yeah, exactly 3 o'clock. As you got the message also.
Yeah, foreigners get the message. So, and in the canonical lamentation, we have many, many manuscripts, and from the first millennium, we have texts that inform us about regular performances. So it seems that these Sumerian texts, so people spoke Akkadian or Aramaic, but these texts were still in Sumerian, as they were cultic texts, so something like Latin in the church 100 years ago. So they were performed on a most probably daily basis. So there was like a cultic calendar, and on the fitting day you performed the fitting balan to calm down the gods. So I found this quite nice in the context of the balan. So history will repeat itself if we don't learn from it. And this is connected to these canonical lamentations. So why to bewail a fallen city? To answer my initial question, one, to demonstrate that the community is still alive. If all people were killed, there is no one left to lament. Also to demonstrate the resilience of a community. So bad things happen, but they keep going on. To celebrate a new beginning, as in the case of the city laments that were performed after the reconstruction of the city and the temple, but also to express the hope for a better future, that these things will not happen again. And in Mesopotamia, to praise the gods, their power, and to appease their heart. The main message, so this Mesopotamian learning from history of the Lamentations, is avoid divine anger and appease the gods. And the best way to appease the gods is to sing and perform these lamentations. So, as you have heard, the last Sumerian lamentations that we have are from the 1st century BC. So this means they might have existed for another 100 or 200 years. We don't know because we don't have evidence, but it would be a huge coincidence that we exactly found the last text that was written and performed. So this means that these lamentations existed throughout all the period when the Hebrew Bible was written and when the Jewish elite was in Mesopotamia, so it would be very easy for them to get in contact with this literature, and this was studied, as I mentioned in this article that I've written with Mark Smith, and there is a whole book by Dobbs Alsop, Whorf, author of Zion, a study of the city lament genre in the Hebrew Bible, where he makes many comparisons with the city laments. So also in ancient Greece, we found several instances of the city lament. So Martin West observed parallels in Aeschylus' 7 Against Thebes in the lamentation over the destruction of Ur. There is also a nice book by Bakvarova, Duch, Dorata, and Sutta, the fall of cities in the Mediterranean, commemoration in literature, folk song, and liturgy, and Simone Oppen in Melammu Symposia 11 studied common literary features of city laments in Greek and Mesopotamian traditions. Via the Bible, practically all Western cultures developed such a genre and based on the metaphors in the Hebrew Bible. So, and now Peter will take over and lead you from the Bible to Estonia.
Thank you. Thank you, Sebastian, for having this guest lecture. It was really informative. Yeah, in our lecture about Sumerian mythology and literature, yeah, we discussed all these creation myths. You mentioned Enki myths like Enki and Ninmah and lots of other creation texts. But city laments, well, we had no more time to deal with all possible genres. So your guest lecture filled this gap, I hope, perfectly also for the students and hopefully also for people who are listening the recording and are looking and listening it here in the lecture hall. So thank you. But as you told, basically all Western nations as well have developed their own city lamentation traditions. Probably everywhere in some form. This lamentations have influenced also local literature, and as you told, it happened through biblical texts, especially the Book of Lamentations in the Hebrew Old Testament, and also, for example, we can take from the Book of Psalms, Psalm 137, for example. So usually in the Old Testament, these laments are written or commemorate the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar II, which happened in the year 586 by the Babylonians. So it was this awful destruction of Jerusalem by evil Babylonians who basically it is not completely known was the entire city destroyed, but probably because obviously Jews were quite hard opponents for the Babylonians, and the Babylonians then destroyed the temple. And who knows? It is not that well known what actually happened historically, but at least the Jewish elites were also deported away from the East Mediterranean homeland, and lots of them also to the city of Babylon itself. But this awful destruction of Jerusalem became one of the motives to the Old Testament. So the Romans did it again in already after Christ. The Persians 533, they gave the permission for the Jews to go back home, and the Persians even helped to reconstruct the temple, which Babylonians had destroyed. But yeah, these passages from the Hebrew Old Testament are numerous where this destruction is mentioned. For example, this line 5 of the Psalm 137. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning, and lots of references to this destruction. So now the next Book of Lamentations, chapter 1, for example. How doth the city sit solitary that was full of people? how is she become as a widow? She that was great among the nations and princess among the provinces, how is she become tributary? She weepeth sore in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. She had none to comfort her among all her lovers. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They are become her enemies. And so on and so on. Yeah. Line 7, Jerusalem remembereth in the days of her affliction and of her anguish all her treasures that she had from the days of old, now that her people fall by the hand of the adversary, and none doth help her. The adversaries have seen her, they have mocked at at her desolations. Jerusalem had grievously sinned, therefore she is become as one unclean. All that honored her despite her, because they have seen her nakedness, she herself also singeth and turneth backward. So this also basing this destruction to relating it also to sin, how to say it. Also this motive that the city was destroyed also because of people were sinners is coming from the Bible. In Mesopotamian cases, yeah, it was in sometimes it could be interpreted that the enemy also came because someone had sinned against the divine will. Sometimes it somehow sounds that Enlil or someone is just angry without any reason. But yeah, in the Bible, yeah, this topic of sin is quite heavily visible. And of course, Mesopotamian city laments were written in the polytheistic context. So in Hebrew Bible, obviously everything was centered to one monotheistic deity. And also, yeah, the city was often personalized. So how to say, the city was speaking like like a person. So and from Estonian literature, we have one original text from the year 1708, written down by an Estonian teacher and church official during the Swedish period. As you know, the Swedish Empire, or if foreign students probably don't know Estonian history that well, but the Swedish Empire basically, you know, they started creating a modern education system for Estonia, and also developing the Estonian language, and began also educating teachers who could also teach peasants to read and to write, and also take care for their souls, because everything was connected to also to Christian faith. But one of these, how to say, Estonian yeah, church officials, Köster, or teachers, when Peter I destroyed Tartu with the Russian troops, so basically everything. Tartu was completely leveled, like also this city laments describe in Mesopotamia, and later how Jerusalem was destroyed in the Bible. So it was a similar situation, and one Estonian educated and enlightened teachers called Hans Käss. He wrote quite a long poem in 1708 about the destruction of the city of Tartu. So it is obviously the inspiration has come to write such a text through biblical passages from several books actually in the Old Testament, and so he wrote this lamentation. which starts with the lines, "Oh, I bore the city of Tartu. What has happened to me?" So big trouble has fallen upon me. Oh, I bore city of Tartu. So very, very nice poetical description. It also describes how the exceptionally terrible Russians came and deported all the educated people and merchants and then it also describes the former glory of Tartu, how everything was nice. Farmers and land people sold their products in Tartu's markets, and professors of the university were teaching. But then also it has a reference that Tartu had sinned again. Then also these evil Russians are somehow pictured as the punishment from God, maybe. How, or how to explain it. But we have a nice German translation already. Actually, this German translation is not that good. More, it gives the meaning, but it is not very good. It gives the meaning, but not the feeling. If you as an Austrian have read it, you understand the context. But we thought that maybe we should make also a comparative English translation where we try to give possible parallels and to make it also with the popular introduction to introduce also this more than 300-year-old Estonian text to wider publics in scholarly or cultural circles in English. So to conclude my short description, yeah, we can say that also Estonian literature, because we can call this work of literature basically the first original longer poem written in Estonian language by an Estonian. So yeah, we can make a statement that Estonian literature is directly connected to the most noble and oldest world literatures, the Sumerian literature. From Sumerian literature, it went to Babylonian literature, from Babylonian to Jewish literature, and also from Mesopotamian literature, it went to Greece, and so on and so on. So we, in sense of literature and also mythology, these connections with the ancient past are actually really, really direct and strong. But nowadays we just don't understand it, how this 4,500 years have all influenced what we have nowadays. So we consider this text written 315 or 17 years ago, we considered it ancient, but actually it is not that ancient. For us, with Sebastian, we study literatures more than 4,000 years old. So for us, this 300-year-old text is like yesterday, written past week or something. So so I will conclude my part of this lecture by stating that it is, for understanding any modern literature, you have to have some knowledge also from the beginnings, and especially from the Sumerian literature. So, but now Sebastian can answer your questions, and maybe if there are longer questions, we can have a discussion. Just ask or give your comments or ask about something about Mesopotamian or Sumerian literature in general, because for students you are writing your papers So you feel free to exploit our Austrian traits while in Estonia.
Yeah, I'll maybe have two questions. First of all, you mentioned that the lamentations were performed, but maybe I didn't catch it. But do we know how they were performed? Were they like sung or something?
So we know that they were performed because some of them have performative indicators, but and from their names, we guess if you call a genre the song of the Shem drum, then you would think that drums are involved. If you call a genre the Balang harp, then you would think that it's played on a harp. And so we have these indicators, but they're in superscript, they give some indication, but we don't get it. So there are different theories, but they're clearly something regarding the performance, and singing the lamentation is also mentioned in the text. So we would, and texts also like the Curse of Agade, they also mention these instruments. So the harp and the drum as instruments of lamentation. So I think we can be very sure that they were sung. So we have no idea how it sounded like, but we have these long litanies, and I think also this tradition is very ancient, very old, that you have this kind of singing like in Orthodox churches. So this might be somewhat close to the Mesopotamian tradition, and that they were performed.
It is certain,
Yeah, so it is certain because we have these lists that mention the performances. So here we only have, like always from antiquity, we have partial evidence, stuff from the first millennium, and we project it into the future, into the past. But it seems if there are texts that are like prayers to the gods, and you have the copies of them, then you would think they were performed from the very beginning. And for the third millennium, we don't have textual evidence for these canonical lamentations. So they are Sumerian texts, and Sumerian as a spoken language dies out around the year 2000 or a bit later, so we don't know exactly.
Maybe some villages were there 1,000 years later, somewhere in a very remote marsh area, but we don't know.
Yeah, so if people don't write, we don't know. So the indicators are like Akkadian personal names, that Sumerian names go back very strongly, and that everyday texts are written in Akkadian. So these are our indicators, is that languages have changed, but still these prayers were written down in Sumerian language and performed in the second millennium, when like at least most of the population did not speak Sumerian anymore.
Yeah, we spoke about this topic, about performances in one of our lectures also in September or October. So there is only one team of scholars led by Ann Kilmer, the same who interpreted the myth Enki and Ninmah, or reinterpreted it, that this creature called Umul is not an old person, but a newborn baby. So she's leading a team who is trying to decipher the Sumerian and Akkadian music script. But and they have some examples in YouTube also. So if you just type in Sumerian music, this professor's name is Kilmer with K. Very easy to just type into YouTube Kilmer and Sumerian music. You will find, but I'm not sure if they are, or if it is so. So, but you know, you can use AI already, and they are using some computer stuff. So maybe they have managed to, because they claim that there is, in some texts there are this musical script elements. So maybe they have something, but we should ask. The music school is here, so we should go and speak with this theoreticians of musicians and ask if these Sumerologists are correct or not. So I would be a bit doubtful. But yeah, and one thing also, Sumerian literature has a huge number of repetitions. So it also might mean that it was, for example, maybe the first part was, I don't know, sang by one person, and then some sort of a choir repeated the exact. So otherwise it would make no sense if you have, so let's say 50 lines of repetitions. So, or what do you think? So
Yes, so
yeah, so
I think Graf Kilmer has done interesting stuff, but the really question is if it's based on facts.
yeah,
Because,
she might be wrong also.
like,
We don't know.
yeah, so most people are rather skeptical because we lack basic information. So we know that they had harps, and we found harps, like the beautiful ones in the British Museum, so from the Royal Cemetery.
Yeah, one had this. I showed you pictures if you remember. Lapis lazuli.
Yeah, with these animals playing the musical instruments. But so I'm not a specialist for this, but colleagues told that it would be necessary to understand how they were tuned in order to reconstruct the music. So if you have no idea how these instruments were tuned, so it's no problem to rebuild it because we have the frame and everything, know how many holes, so how long the strings were and everything, but we have no idea how they were tuned. So, and I think this is really a basic problem for understanding this, and that they had like musical annotations is also disputed by some experts. So it's a controversial issue. And like one funny story from the beginnings of Assyriology, so people thought that they had found texts with musical annotations. And then Benno Landsberger, one of the grandmasters of Assyriology, he wrote an article on these texts and demonstrated that they had nothing to do with musical annotations, but were basic school exercises. Like people repeating the same signs all over.
A similar funny story spoken by one Estonian archaeologist who excavated in Syria. So he described how an American professor from an ancient well, he found a statue, what he thought was a Sumerian priest statue. It was like they were leathers or something. And there was a German excavation of the Münster University, and an American excavation leader went to this German professor and said, "Look what I found, a Sumerian priest." And the German professor said, "No, it's not a Sumerian priest. It is a lamb's ass." So it was a toy animal, children, and it probably broken, and someone had thrown it to the well. It was just the backside of a toy lamb. So it was an American, Sumerian priest in Syria. So such, the same can be true with the Sumerian music. It might be completely not the musical script, but something else. We don't know. Maybe powerful artificial intelligence might find or solve it. I think human brain is too small.
Yeah,
for being able to solve this.
Yeah, so there are too many unknown factors. At least I think so.
But you all can listen to Sumerian music. So the Americans always are more sensational, so they want to be in media, and when they find something, they always make a media event. So lots of hypothetical Sumerian music. YouTube. Do you have any more questions?
Yeah, I'll ask the question. So you mentioned that in Mesopotamian cultures, the idea of justice was especially important. So I just wanted to ask, how do they understand what justice is? So was it purely based on the ancient eye for an eye concept, or did the social roles affect it? For example, was justice different from nobility and regular men? How do they understand it?
Well, it was for them quite obvious that people had different roles in society, but like we also have texts that are comparable to the Book of Job. So where people are lamenting their bad fate, and their basic argument is, I haven't sinned, I have done nothing wrong, and despite this, evil things are befalling me. So I am sick, I'm treated badly by other people, I don't have any money, and the gods don't help me. So simply, the basic idea is if you behave well, your life should be okay. And they also claim that they are really bad people and they are rich and they are doing well. And so this is the basic idea of justice, that they are gods, they take control of the world and they make the world a just place. And if you personally experience that what you are doing and what is happening to you is not explainable, so the idea is you should only get sick or you should have problems in your life if you are doing bad things. So, and there we have these texts where people are speaking, I have committed no sin, I have done no wrong, and still I am punished. So basically every suffering is conceptualized as a punishment. And if you have this ideology, then you come to this point to ask, why am I suffering?
Yeah, if the students of this course remember, we have this letter of Siim Sammu to Enki. A sick man is also said that I have committed no sin. Now why? And he concludes that some evil god has sent the sin to me, but I haven't done that.
Yeah, so they find different solutions to this problem. So, and I think if you're a religious person, this is always like a problem that your experience seems to show that there are problems in this world. And one of the easiest solution is simply what in Assyriology is often called the secret sin, that you complain to the god and say, oh, I haven't sinned. And then the God reveals to you, you have done something wrong. You should apologize, and then everything is fine. So, and then there are like more complex ideas. So like that a sin of your forefathers might afflict you. And there is also something like the idea that humankind is generally sinful. So we have this idea in Mesopotamia, what is the original sin in Christianity? There is something similar to that humans always deserve to be punished. So this especially comes up in the first millennium, and that only mercy of Marduk, for example, can save humanity.
The death of Gilgamesh had also that the evil being born to mankind or humankind. So the bad thing that you were born in as a man. So yeah, already in Sumerian literature it is visible. So belonging to humanity involves some dirtiness or sin.
Yeah, so seemingly this was a problem that troubled all human beings also in very ancient times, and they wrote their texts. And one of the most important texts is the so-called Babylonian Sea Odyssey. So this is available in nice new translations by Takayoshi Oshima, and he gives all the context of this text. But it nicely demonstrates that there was like philosophical, theological speculation in ancient Mesopotamia, where people conceptualized the world as an organized system and pointed at problems in the worldviews and tried to find new solutions.
Yeah, so there's of course in modern society, most of the people don't know even what the original sin means, because now in the modern view, people have no sin or how to say, but maybe 100 years ago, every Estonian peasant knew that man is a sinner. So because what happened in the Garden of Paradise, or some, of course, look, many other sins that humanity performed, but hard to say. Modern people in most of the Western countries even understand that the feeling of guilt that people once had in that sense, who were believers. It is maybe similar that, let's say, in Buddhist or some Hinduist cultures, there is this, how to say, you cannot harm any living being. But there's still, like the Dalai Lama in Tartu said, he was asked, what do you do when a mosquito comes to your face and starts sucking your blood? And Dalai Lama made this move. He said, I will kill it. So, but in that sense, yeah, in Buddhism and in that area, yeah, you can say that this original sin is that man always does harm to other living beings. So in Christianity and Judaism, it is a bit different. You are a sinner because of your thoughts and bad deeds, and because of being born as a man. It's more fatalistic stuff.
Yeah, but I think an important thing to understand is that, like, basically all Eurasian cultures think along similar lines. So this idea of a just world must be really, really old, because we find it everywhere. So it seems to be a basis of human societies.
The
That
justice, of course.
yes.
There has always been a concept of justice in every basic. Yeah. So you cannot steal, you cannot kill. Basically, 10 commandments give also the list what is justice. So when there is no, let's say, society that doesn't honor this justice system or just laws, so
It might not work.
Usually it will. When justice system is corrupt and or somehow, yeah, to one or other direction, so this society usually isn't very strong very long.
Yes, there is a nice painting from the First World War, where a small child asks her grandmother and asks, grandmother, will the 10 Commandments be in place again after the war has ended? So, and this is exactly the problem, that we have just systems within a society. So, like in a city, everything is well organized, well ordered. But when war comes in, two systems clash, and then we have these complaints about injustice in the world. So suddenly there is no justice anymore, because these two societies have their own systems, what they see as just, and they have structures to establish justice within the society, so by police and judges. And between states, there is no world police that establishes order between the different states, and so there are clashes and problems, and the socially constructed just space collapses.
Yeah, that's basically that is the question of a big war. Justice doesn't exist anymore. It goes relatable to the city limits. Yes. Yeah, it is something happening outside the normal understandings of justice.
Yes, and therefore we have all these texts dealing with this problem, because obviously traveled people, that they have their organized life and then some disaster breaks in. So, nice music.
Professor has nothing else to do but this music. No more. Okay.